My relationship with the breath, and the more that I've sort of deepened into it, my health, my relationships, my business, and so forth, every aspect has been greatly enhanced as a result. The deeper you breathe, the more you receive. That I need this amount of money or I need this much to be good. We need to drop that notion first and trust that whatever we have right now, we're good.
There are so many people that are aware that they have things that are buried. How can their breath help them move through the emotional repression and things that they've buried for a while?
Well,
Alrighty, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Enheartened. And today I am joined by a brother, and again, I like to think of him as a brother in mission. I have a few brothers in mission, and Christopher is definitely one of them. And I like to think of Chris as one of the soul-led men out there, somebody who is and has allowed himself to get in touch with the shadows that come with the human experience and walk the path of healing and integration so that on the other side of it, you can allow yourself to stand stronger as a leader, as a facilitator, as a guide, as now an author of your new book that we're going to get into as well, Master Your Breath, Transform Your Life. And also as a dad, man, also as just as a man that other men can also rely on for support in their own journey of transformation. So it's a pleasure to have you today, Chris. And I was thinking about all the ways we could begin this conversation, but I'm going to start with this one. Let's say somebody just gets into your universe. What do they need to understand about you to grasp the man that you are today?
mm, wow. That's certainly a way to lead, and I appreciate that question. And before I get into that, I just want to just give you some love and respect, and I have deep reverence for you and your work, and brother to brother, to be having this conversation, it really means a lot. And knowing that both of us, in our own respect and the work that we share, a lot of crossover, but it really what it takes to show up embodied in what we do, and it really continues to step into and have us continually step into the fire of our own hearts, because a true embodied leader is walking the talk and is really facing off with the depths of themselves. And so
Yeah,
continuously doing that and just having respect for other men, other people that are doing that as well. So thank you, brother.
it's a pleasure, man. Thank you for accepting my invitation.
Oh, it's an honor, and hopefully the rain isn't too loud on the outside here, but we got a nice stormy day, and it's nice to be having this conversation. And so, to your question about what it's like for someone to step into my ecosystem, what would they, what would their impression be, or
Yeah,
what should they know about me?
what would they need to understand, maybe to grasp, to under, to know, to have to grasp the man you are today?
Mm. Yeah, well, this man that is showing up in this conversation, of course, has gone through many different iterations and has gone through many different variations and versions, and all have which, brought me to this moment right now. And I would say that as someone that very much values the inner work, as someone that very much values transformation, and pushing myself to my edges, to test myself, to bring myself into places where it might be deeply uncomfortable. But there's nothing that I'm ever going to say or teach or share with anybody that I haven't first done myself, because really I look at myself as a great experimenter of life, and to taste the different flavors of life and what life has to show me. And at times that is deeply uncomfortable, it's deeply painful. And there's been many moments in my life where I've wanted to throw in the towel and give up and just be at that. But that perseverance, that commitment, that devotion to myself, to God, to life, it's just so strong that there is never a moment where I would ever give up on myself or God or life in that way. But there definitely has been many instances, which I'm sure we can get into, that has brought me to a place now to be having an in-depth conversation and be sharing the wisdom that I do with people, both from the vantage point of a student as well as a transformational teacher.
Yeah. Would you say that spirit of devotion has always been there for you? Because in my experience, the devotion to the divine that sometimes people embody at a certain point in their life is not sometimes always there from the get-go. Maybe glimpses of it, but were there moments in your journey that brought you to a realization that I really need to be devoted more to that relationship, to God, to the divine, to maybe even to truth?
That's a great question. I would say that very much most of my life has been devoted to achievements or
Hmm.
devoted to validation or devoted to recognition. And this ego driven part of myself to seek that outside to ideally of what I was in the place of thinking that that would fill me up in some level of worthiness that really wasn't there because it was filled with insecurity and inadequacy. And so therefore the devotion was to the external things.
Hmm.
But where over the past several years began to flip the script is to devote all of who I am and what I do in this world and the roles that I play to a higher power and to
Hmm.
a greater source. And whether we want to label that source God, spirit, it doesn't really matter. But really, for me, it's that coming into deep relationship with the divine, as you said, which really propels my journey today. And the service work and everything that I do is very much based off of this devotion to the greater source that lives within me and is not outside of me, but that
Yeah.
is me. And to recognize that and to live that is it's very powerful. And I'm continuing to step deeper into that. Are there parts of me that still seek validation? Uh, Absolutely, certainly. But there is a deeper day by day devotion to something greater, which I notice when I'm in that place of that depth of devotion. My service is enhanced, my life is elevated in many different ways, and I'm also met with deeper challenges and struggles to test that devotion, to test that trust.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at on that.
Yeah, you mentioned that period of looking outwardly for validation and these ego-driven pursuits of achievements and all of that. And I would love to get more into it because we have such ingrained desires to achieve. And again, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with it. And as long as it doesn't disconnect you from your core. But I would assume that during these times, it was in the pursuit of some external form of success. And I want to get a little bit more into that. What did it look like for you? What were you seeking? And who were you unconsciously trying to get the approval of during that period of time?
That's a deep question and a very powerful question. I would say that who was I trying to, and start with that last part, who was I trying to get approval from? I was trying to get approval from the world, and digging deeper into that wound, right, and that shadow. There was many things that were uncovered, and of course, the overall inherent sense of unworthiness that I need to get this thing. If I get this thing, then I'll feel more worthy. But as we know, that isn't the case. You can get as much validation, recognition, successes, whatever. You can have billions of dollars, but if you still feel inherently unworthy within yourself, then that wound is going to keep being fueled. And I think of course we can stem it back and come to childhood, you know, trauma, wounding, having sort of a severed relationship with my father. I remember even saying these words when I was younger, even in high school, when I wasn't speaking to my father. I would say, I'm going to pull up to his house in a Ferrari and be wearing this suit and performing this job or whatever it is, just to prove to him that I made it. And because I guess really wasn't an A student, and maybe I felt that other people, my parents, didn't really believe in me in certain ways,
Hmm.
specifically my relationship with my father. So it was always, going against that father wound that went super deep. And when I
Yeah.
realized that and got to the depth and a deeper understanding of that father wound and began to transmute and alchemize it through breath, through plant medicine, through all these different modalities, shadow work, inner child healing, I realized that, wow, all this time, this life force energy expenditure that I was having trying to prove myself, now reversing that and flipping that to a place of devotion to a higher power, there's so much more energy available for me. And so the success that would come wouldn't come off of the hustle and the grind, which I've put in a lot of effort to get here, but it would come from an inner alignment, and it would be mirrored from the alignment within myself. Because, of course, as you know, we live in an inside out reality. And so
Hmm.
that whole experience of my life and the way it's being mirrored to me began to shift as a result of coming into a deeper inner alignment.
Yeah. I would love to have an idea of the setup, especially for you. You mentioned, growing up, you had this severed relationship with your dad, and it would be cool to understand a little bit what was the setup. Was he not a part of your life? Did he purposefully decide to pull away, and just so that people may eventually relate and understand what was going on there, and also the drive, the strong drive that takes a young teenager to be like, one day I'm going to pull out to his house with a Ferrari. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I appreciate you asking that. And when I sort of share these stories, or at least my perception of it, I want to be very careful with that because, of course, we have our limited lenses. But after having experiences for a long time and dissected it, I can really share, I think, from a very healed and whole place with it. But basically, in short, growing up, my dad was very present. He took me to games and all my sporting events and all of that, and was present in many ways. Emotionally attuned and present, not so much. Having dealt with his own traumas and wounds that were never sort of alchemized and integrated. And so when I was 10, my parents got divorced and he remarried about a year and a half, 2 years later. And that experience for me personally was very difficult.
Hmm.
And, I remember a period going to see my dad and he was living on the floor in his office. I didn't have much money. Our house went bankrupt that I was living in. And so there was a lot of financial pressure and strain and stress in the household. And then, of course, him then getting remarried, my relationship with her as a child was very strained.
By her, you mean the new
His wife,
wife?
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of narcissistic tendencies, and ways of manipulation, which really just drove me away. And I realized this actually in many different facets, but really what my dad was aligning with, of course, later on, I began to come to this awareness, was really the relationship he had with his mother, because it was very much the same. And
Hmm.
so essentially, I just got fed up with the situation. And by 13 years old, instead of going there every other weekend, I just said, I'm not doing this anymore. It doesn't feel good to me. And there was just a lot of behavior that felt very manipulative, very controlling. And so that was sort of the wedge in the relationship, and therefore carried through all of my high school years. We didn't talk for 4 years, and have since been in and out of communication. And really, what a very pivotal part of my journey of understanding this wound, as well as my father himself, was when I sat with ayahuasca for the first time in 2016, and I began to. have this vision of him in a basement with all of his 8 brothers and sisters protecting them because his dad was about to come home from a binge, a night of binge drinking and start to abuse and beat the kids. And
Yeah.
so I later confirmed this with him after sharing this experience, and he very much said that was extremely accurate without ever have told me that. And so you can imagine the amount of pressure, responsibility, weight, trauma that this man is holding. And therefore, the only time I would actually see him show any emotion would be when he was drinking himself.
Hmm.
And this was a repeating pattern. So in short, this was my experience, and therefore began to come to a deeper level of forgiveness and compassion for him and his experience, and not so much project the blame anymore, where he became sort of this outpicturing of trying to seek validation, but started to forgive him for maybe some of his wrongdoings and allow him to be set free. And as a result of that, setting myself free in the process.
Yeah. What would you say it does to the psyche of a young boy when you're going through an experience of knowing some degree of presence, paternal presence? He was there to a certain degree, and then the fracture happens, and then there is the alienation that also happens, almost as if he was taken away from you. And also, what would you say? What is a kind of a support? Because we live in a society where many more and more young boys go through, part of their childhood without connection with their father figures, which I think it's a big epidemic that is going on at the moment right now. So what does it do to a young psyche, the psyche of a young boy? And what did it do to your psyche at that time? And what do you think is the support that young boys need during these phases?
Yeah, that's a beautiful one. Another powerful question. You know, I'm sure we can probably have a very lengthy conversation on this, but personally speaking, I would say that, without having that sort of emotionally, and just speaking from my personal experience of being very intuitive, very sensitive, feeling, I have a lot of water and Pisces in my chart, and so a depth of feeling and wanting to relate emotionally and wanting to relate intuitively without even expressing that and saying that, because as a kid you don't really know that, but later and then reflecting back and realizing, wow, I really needed that emotionally in tune father figure as well as a mother figure, right? Which I didn't
Hmm.
have. Both experiences were very much the opposite of that. And so, very much needing this. And then also that protective mechanism, right? Of having that safe male role model around to be able to steward me and show me what is it like to be a man in the world. And not only
Yeah.
just a man, because our version of that is often skewed, but an embodied, conscious, awakened man. And then I would say that probably for you and for me and for many of the people listening to this, we haven't had great examples of that. Fortunately, I had a grandfather, I have a grandfather, my mom's father, who very much was a big part of my upbringing. And so there was that there as sort of an elder. Of course, he had his own things, but he was a very grounded man. And we still, even to this day, he's 95, have wonderful conversations. So I at least had that.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, that's really great. Because, many people do not really have available an example of masculine presence, really, just presence, let alone a healthy presence. So, yeah. Now, what I would love to ask you is, what does it look like to extract yourself from that phase? It feels like you've gone through this desert of like father presence, and then you emerge from that. What are the subtle awakenings, like the moments of awakenings? I often feel like um the way truth finds its way into our hearts, it starts with subtle nudges, and then it gets louder and louder and louder again. So I wonder, what were the wake up calls, maybe tiny at the beginnings, to the loudest wake up calls that made you realize this drive towards external achievement, this drive towards, I don't know, you know, it feels like a part of you saw your dad and projected your dad onto the external world, which is an internalization that we often have. It's like we have a tendency to see our mothers as this inner world and our father figures as this external world, and kind of going out there to um, conquer quote unquote the father. So I just want to have a sense of what was it like for you to emerge from that place.
That's another one that, contemplating it and reflecting upon it, is very interesting, and I think you're going to appreciate this. So in 2008, I would say, when I map it back and I share this, my hero's journey and my awakening journey really began in 2008.
Hmm.
And in that year, I was given a book, and I was given a book, probably you've heard, Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss.
Yeah.
And funny enough, who gave me that book? My dad's wife.
Oh.
So very interesting full circle moment, right? And also being a very, again, powerful teacher, to reclaim my power, but to be given and gifted this book then by her, and then actually begin this journey of remembering and sort of more so just validating what I truly believed. Well, that book specifically about reincarnation, but then beginning to contemplate past lives, to be contemplating life after death and what this all meant. And so this was sort of the illumination that began to happen. And from there, at that point, I was stepping out of my undergrad, then going into grad school, and then, for a business degree and working in the corporate realm. And of course, I thought that the corporate realm was how I go and prove myself, right? So I go and make this
Yeah.
money, I go drive this car, and so forth, until that all completely dissolved. And I found myself in a place where I no longer desired any of that. And I needed to escape reality, really, and come back to my roots, my primal roots that were calling me, and align with the values of making a difference, of helping others, of traveling, of adventure, and so forth. And without getting into the micro story and side quest, but I ended up following a very powerful synchronicity and sign, a literal sign that, showed me the way to my next destination, which was Africa. And I lived in Tanzania for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer. And that's when things really began to accelerate, because not only was I living without electricity, modern amenities, internet, and so forth, I was cooking over a fire, I was bucket bathing. So I was very, very much connected to nature and connected to the cycles of the sun, to the community, and all of that. And then amongst that journey, another side quest of having nearly lost my life and drowned on the Zambezi River in Zambia, whitewater rafting in a class 5 rapid, which was that then ultimate shakeup, like, okay, you were here.
Yeah.
Wake up.
Yeah. So I'm so curious about one thing. You say the person who gives you the book that begins a whole new journey in your life is that woman that took your dad away from you, quote unquote. At
Mhm.
least to the young boy inside of you. It's like, well, he chose her. Um, so did it change your relationship to her?
It changed my perspective towards
Hmm.
her, also offering a deep level of forgiveness. And really, where I was previous to that was very bitter, very angry, very, very just like outwardly just like, who are you? That type of really rageful energy at times.
Yeah.
And so I, therefore, and not in that moment, but over time, I began
Yeah.
to do that work of deep compassion and forgiveness for her journey. And that was also another critical and crucial part of my healing.
Yeah. Yeah. I just find it so fascinating that the seeds of our transformation are often in the places where we got the most hurt. And it's like God wanting to work in weird paradoxes. And I find that really fascinating. So, this episode in Africa, where you nearly lost your life and just being in Africa alone, would you say that in a different way, that was a rite of passage as well? That's something that you needed. And I wonder if in the journey of many people, they need, because it seems like the symbolism in your personal journey, you had to go so far away from home to find the home within. Um, and there's an interesting parallel there. Would you say that it is needed for many people on their journey of transformation?
I would say that traveling adventure outside of my bubble or comfort zone has always led to deep transformation.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that's probably in part to different energetic vortexes and portals around the world.
Hmm.
Also, getting outside of that place where you're just kind of stagnant in a way and you begin to meet new people, you begin to have these new experiences. Because really, the way I see life is that we're here to learn through being alive. And being alive means having these experiences, doing these different things, challenging ourselves, meeting our edges, and so forth. This is really what, when we get to the depth of what true aliveness is. And for me, there's always been this curiosity to explore more, that I'm never satisfied with this version right here. Like there's always more to uncover. And of course, we can probably dissect that into different wounds as well. But for the most part, just I would just say spiritually curious.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that time was critical. It was everything that I needed to actually be having this conversation right now, because in that moment of losing my life and then regaining my life, what was the thread in that? The thread was my breath. And I share this story that in that moment when I came back into my body after being outside of my body and being saved and taking that inhale, I began to, in that moment, feel everything and what life was here to show me, to teach me. And I received a message, and the message was that you're here as a part of your mission. The broader mission is to share the power of breath and what breath means. And therefore, hence, now over 10 years later, here I am.
I love that so much. I was gonna ask you, what was your initiation with the breath? Because it is such a potent part of your work at the moment and your journey. Your whole book is about it. But you already answered the question. Now I'm curious about the death, though, because one of my biggest fears is definitely drowning.
Mm,
And you know, growing up, I grew up in Africa. I grew up in Central Africa. There weren't a lot of water close to where I grew up. My dad used to say, man, in my village, we only know water when it's in a cup or when it's in a calabash or something like that. So he wasn't the biggest fan of seeing us in, any body of water and all of that. So it wasn't a big part of my life growing up. And from his own aversion, I internalized a lot of fear. So, and I'm not sure if that moment was necessarily conscious, but what is it like to be in this monstrous river, a huge river, and to be on the verge of like this might be it?
mm. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty ineffable experience. But if I were to put it into words, I would say the first word that really I felt and the experience and emotion I felt was deep fear. I was terrified,
Yeah,
and feeling the force of water. Let's just say that at this point in my life, my respect and reverence for water as an element, as a
yeah,
force is, I have a lot of gratitude to it, and also respect in the way that I'm not going to put myself in a place where it could
yeah,
potentially bring me under again. But being in that moment, they always say go with the flow, right? And this is the grand lesson: go with the flow of life, and how powerful that is as a metaphor, but quite literally when that's happening, your first instinct is, of course, the nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and you go into fight or flight.
yeah,
And I was just in complete fight mode, just trying to get myself somewhere to shore and bobbing up and down through this washing machine of a class 5 rapid, getting up, swallowing water, going down, getting up, swallowing water. We're just like intense chaos
yeah,
until I could no longer fight. And what
Yeah.
happened when I no longer fought? I let go because my body had no more strength left in it. And there I was then leaving this human existence through the portal of my body and seeing my consciousness leave me. And as most sort of near death people that have wrote books on it and share about it, is there's just this grand light that you approach, and it's one of the most powerful, peaceful experiences I've ever had in my entire life to this point. And then returning from that to actually becoming back into my body and back to my breath, um, I just tears. There's nothing else that could come through that portal, that experience.
Yeah. It feels like the African spirits of the river had some work that needed to be done on you during that
Mm.
moment. Besides initiating you with the breath, how else would you say that moment changed you forever?
Well, I mean, it rewired my perspective on death, which I feel is probably massive. And I think is, if we were to, I guess, boil down all fear, what does it come down to? It comes down to the fear of death or the fear of annihilation, which is something that I think all of us humans deal with in some capacity, whether we like to admit it or not. And so I would say that it sort of alchemized that fear into just a deep knowing that there is so much more beyond the veil,
Yeah.
and that we don't have to, because we don't actually die, right? Our consciousness, it literally does not die. It's being transformed all the time. And I think it's our attachment to these human vessels and bodies that keep us in this state where we want to cling on to life and to control it. But in reality, like, there's always a letting go process. And the more that we can let go and trust the divine source, God, spirit, whatever we want to call it, the more our relationship to ourself and to life just deepens in such a potent way. And we begin to live life with more meaning, with more purpose. It doesn't mean that I still don't go through distraction and monotony and all that, but I feel like there's a deeper level of just like consciousness leading my life.
Yeah. I love it. What is your relationship with breath? What is your understanding of it? And also, I'm curious about the mystical nature of the breath because we tend to look at it as this 3D mechanism where air comes in and air goes out. And in my experience, there is way more to the whole thing. You know, I have a personal relationship with the breath where I think of it as a conscious being, this invisible conscious being that maybe is even an aspect of the human soul that works with you from conception, maybe from the first breath to the last one. And I want to get into your own concept of the breath, your own relationship with it, and also the mystical nature of the breath. Have you ever, yeah, what comes up for you when you think of it?
Yeah, I love this question because my relationship with it is continuously deepening, and I'm continuously exploring what it means to me. But if we were to just sort of boil it down into a simplistic way, where actually I would say that my favorite way to explore breath is through the mystical lens, rather. The science is great, and I'm happy to share more about the science. And I know people like to wrap their minds around the why, but
Yeah.
I really like the metaphysical and mystical side of this. And so I'll
So,
share from that.
actually, how about we start
Okay.
with, let's say somebody is listening to this thing and has been the biggest skeptic about breathwork ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this person has looked at all the videos of people doing breath work and having catharsis and feeling like this is so weird. So I
Mm.
want you to speak to the skeptic who's like, this thing is full of shit. What would you like
Yeah.
to tell to this person?
Great. That's a great place to start. So number one, I would say that, anybody that is a skeptic of anything, try it for yourself, and have the direct experience, because the way I view breath is as not me sharing what it means and all of that, I'm sure, and we're going to get into that, but it's the direct experience of it. And I would say that, every single person, every one of us takes on average 20,000 breaths per day. Yet, we look at this breath and we view it as simply a survival mechanism, a mechanism that just gets us through the day, and here we are to the next day. And yes, it is a survival mechanism because without breath, we're not here. And you can go a long time without food and water, but without breath, you're dead in a few minutes. And so this is such a powerful tool, but it goes way beyond the survival mechanism of it. It takes you into an incredible exploratory state in which you become present and one with life. But how do we know that if we don't try it? So, what I would invite anybody to do, and we can even just do it in this moment if it feels good for you,
Yeah.
is we can just take 10 conscious, deep breaths together. And of course, if someone's driving, you can do this with your eyes open. But I would invite anybody listening to this podcast and to close your eyes to come into a state where you can just get a little comfortable. And from there, we're going to take 10 deep rhythmic breaths together. And we're going to breathe to about 4 counts in, 4 counts out. And we're going to breathe in through our nose and we're going to breathe out of our mouth. And we're going to really focus on breathing into our belly, into our diaphragm. And from there, we're just going to come back into the space. And I just want you to, and invite you to close down your eyes now. And without getting into the rhythmic breaths yet, just notice your breath in this moment. Notice the texture, notice the rhythm of your breath. Is it short? Is it shallow? Is it deep? Is it slow? Is it steady? And just taking the pulse on where we're at in this moment with our breath. And also taking the pulse in this moment on our current state of being. How are we feeling right now? Is there tension? Is there tightness? Is there constriction, resistance in the body? Or do we feel open, free, liberated, relaxed? Notice your current state. Is there a feeling or emotion present? Is there any level of stress or anxiety, fear, overwhelm, anger, grief? Is there joy? Is there happiness? Is there fulfillment? Just notice. And together, we're going to take these 10 deep breaths together and come back then and survey our after state. So exhaling out all of the air and taking a deep breath in into the belly and let that go, release. Again, deep, steady breath in and release. Feeling that flow on the inhale and the flow on the exhale. Continuing to open ourselves up, breathing in and breathing out. Just following me, breathing in and exhale. In and out. In and out. 2 more breaths. And release. 1 more deep breath. Hold that breath at the top. And release it all the way out. And just for a moment, keeping your eyes closed, come back to your natural breathing. And just notice and observe. And then just inviting you when you're ready to just to open your eyes and survey the space, the room, the environment around you. How do you feel? What's alive? What's present? And perhaps if you are a skeptic, now you can feel just maybe a micro shift that's happened. Now imagine doing this for multiple minutes. Magic happens.
I love it, man. Thank you for that reset, breath reset. And I'm curious about what are your thoughts on the magic that happens when you surrender to the breath and your body starts releasing the things that were stored that you maybe didn't even have access to, and you start crying, releasing, and I want to have a little bit of your opinion there. It's like what really goes on. I have, there's the theory about the breath out there, but what's your take on what really happens on a cellular level, on a nervous system level that causes that release?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So my understanding of it, having been a practitioner for a decade now, and having facilitated thousands of sessions and going into many myself, one thing that I sort of, I guess, have shared in many conversations is that the breath has its own consciousness. Just as plant medicine has its own consciousness, it goes to the different areas within ourselves that need attention and healing. And, as you are well aware of in the nature of your work, that we hold these energetic and emotional imprints within our somatic body. And those emotional and energetic imprints can show up as tension, as resistance, as tightness. Underneath those imprints are oftentimes what we deem to be negative emotions, but I don't really like that word. It's more so just an emotional state that hasn't been integrated and healed. And underneath that is generally a core wound. And so when we go through these layers and we use our breath, we begin to send life force, energy, prana, chi, whatever we want to call it, into these areas. And therefore, through just the conscious intent of breathing into these areas, what are we doing? What is breath? Breath is life. We are breathing life into these areas. We're shining a light on the shadow that has been, of course, deeply suppressed within us. And therefore, that is illuminated and then brought up into our conscious mind. And
Hmm.
we can do one of two things with it. We can either continue to bury it and suppress it, or we can allow ourselves to liberate it. And the liberation comes through the feeling of it. And so breath really gets us into the somatic body, because what we're doing, and I guess even just to back up one step, is that what happens when we experience trauma, right? Trauma creates a nervous system response in which we go to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And this keeps us then locked into the sympathetic state of being, which is very much chaotic, very intense, lots of mind chatter. And if we don't have the person or practitioners around us to help us to alchemize and transform that trauma, it becomes a habitual pattern, as I mentioned, an imprint. And what happens when that takes place? Our breath pattern becomes shallow. It becomes very much for an experience from the chest. And we're breathing multiple times per minute, which is only exacerbating the stress and anxiety and overwhelm that we currently feel, not only from the external stimuli, but
Yeah.
from the trauma itself. And so to fast forward into a deeper level of this is, so when we're breathing and doing these things, we can begin then to experience the release of that core wound or imprint. And it generally is in the manifestation of maybe crying, of shaking, of yelling, of laughing, of yawning. There's sweating. There's many ways in which we are beginning to release that energy from us. And so when someone has a cathartic release like this is a very good sign that they're getting to the root of something that's been buried and something that's been, I guess, in many ways avoided for most of their lives.
Yeah, I love it so much. I remember um, the first time I really let go in a breathwork session because I was scared of breathwork for so long, man. I don't know how to explain it. It was just so weird, and part of me felt like there was something in there for me. It was probably 2019 where I kind of surrendered to a first breathwork session. In 2020, I took a facilitator training, and in the training, we had to go through so many freaking breathwork sessions, and I would remember how I was holding back, like, and even through the holding back, the tears would flow, and I was aware of my resistance to really letting go. But I remember in a moment of fully allowing, there was a weird laughter that came after, and it lasted for such a long time. It's like the cosmic joke finally hit me. But that was one of the first moments of surrender. The first call of breath work, I would say for me was probably in 2016, 2017. During that time, I was having weird asthma symptoms, and I knew it was from intensified stress. I was running a business that was on the verge of collapsing, and there are so many buried emotions I was struggling with. And if somebody is dealing with this kind of like repression, how can they work with the breath to undo the repression? Because there are so many people that are aware that they have things that are buried, but they have a hard time making, even accessing and expressing that. How can the breath help them move through the emotional repression and things that they've buried for a while?
Well, that's it's really wonderful to bring awareness to that because really it takes a submission in a way to it.
Yes.
It takes a trust in it, right? Like trusting ourselves is trusting our breath.
Yeah.
And when we're not in that state of trust and we're not willing to let go, then we are going to continuously be in this pattern of holding on. But I would say that one of the greatest tools to facilitate the letting go process, which I believe is the ultimate spiritual lesson for all of us, is to work with the power of your breath. And even if that's just easing into it and just noticing how you're breathing throughout the day, taking conscious breaths, but then deepening into an actual journey, into an experience, and allowing that to guide you and show you. What I always say in all of my journeys that I facilitate, and I say the same thing every single time. I say the more you can let go, the more that is going to be illuminated for you. And I also have a quote that I share all the time as well: is the deeper you breathe, the more you receive. And so if you're just sort of, kind of dilly-dallying in a session and not really breathing deep, you're going to get out what you put in. But the deeper you breathe, the more you receive not only clarity, but you receive these different levels of healing that happen as a result of going into and surrendering to the power of your own breath.
Yeah, I love that so much. And something that's coming up, I mean, maybe a prompt that I would love to offer to anybody who is listening to this would be, if I submit to my breath, if I fully submit to it, what I'm afraid I will have to feel is. I'm really curious what comes up for anybody. You can drop the comment wherever you're listening to this. I'm really curious. I'll go back to the comments just to see your responses. But you made a parallel between breath and prosperity or receivership. And I also want to say I feel like there's a parallel to be made between breath and even abundance there. But before getting there, I would love to explore how has your relationship to the breath itself changed your relationship to, I don't know, changed you as a man? How has it impacted you as the father you are today? And what do you think? What have you seen in the masculine realm, the relationship that most men have with their breath, and how it could support men to be more embodied and maybe to become the men that these times demand?
Yeah, I love that one. We'll bookmark the prosperity and abundance because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are curious about that, and I do have some insights to offer around that and manifestation. But to answer this first sort of part, I would say that my relationship with the breath, and the more that I've sort of deepened into it, my life has certainly enhanced, had been enhanced in not only my health, my relationships, my business, and so forth. Every aspect, my fatherhood, has been greatly enhanced as a result because of the transformation of my inner world through the breath.
Hmm.
So if we look at Hermetic law, right, as within, so without, and as above, so below, we can really see that this is one grand movie projection, what we call life. And so when we're shifting our state, our inner state or our inner consciousness, which the breath is very much foundational and facilitating because it brings up everything to the surface to be seen, that is creating the limitation or perceived limitation in the external reality, we can begin to breathe that out, exhale that, shift that energy in real time, whether that's a belief, a story, something that we're inherently just carrying within us, the unworthiness, the insecurity, and so forth. All of that is meant to come up to the surface, and no better way than to breathe that through your body, through your cells, and everything, and literally repatterning, recalibrating yourself in real time. Now, it doesn't mean that that's the only tool. There's great tools to integrate that through what you teach and shadow work, inner child healing, and so forth. But this is the first most important step.
And it's also accessible.
It's accessible. That's it.
Yeah,
It's free. It's under your nose. It's there the whole
yeah,
time. And yet I mean, this should be taught in schools. It should be taught everywhere.
yeah,
It's silly that we're not focusing on this as an experience to be taught to children and all that. That's another conversation.
yeah.
So,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, the aspects of helping, just using the most accessible technology that is already here to deepen our presence, to shift the ways we lead, we love, we parent, we show up for each other. I think it's really primordial. And the other the other thing I would love to get to is, what do you think most men struggle with the most? I mean, at the moment,
Yeah.
and how can a conscious relationship with the breath be, one of the tools that they need to transcend these struggles?
Yeah, what I've seen in myself and what I've seen in other men, having done a lot of men's work and facilitating retreats and all these sorts of things, I find that, really we can chop this up to many things, but so much of the masculine is holding the weight of the world and very much in a place of emotional isolation, which is creating a deep level of disconnection with their bodies, with themselves, with the world around them. And of course, we can layer then shame and guilt into the picture. And then we have a whole cocktail of really an angry, stressed out, anxious, fearful man that is running his life, his relationships, his health, and so forth. And so I just find that most men are, by nature, in this way, living in this world, deeply constricted. Whereas the feminine, or sort of the representation of that externally in the females, is very much, I wouldn't say this is general, but more so open and in that flow. And of course, that's the natural state of, if we're talking about the principles of masculine and feminine. But yeah, men are deeply constricted, which is causing so much of these outbursts, and also so much of the suicidal ideation and actual suicide that happens because they can't hold it anymore, or perceive that they can't. But what happens if they were to deepen their relationship to their, at least start with their breath? Well, now we're talking, because now we're getting into the places that have been suppressed and repressed and avoided their entire lives.
Yeah. It's like what I'm hearing you is, through the breath, it's not just the physical body that's exhaling. It's also the emotional body that's exhaling, and maybe even we might even say ethereal bodies exhaling, and or breathing through that. So yeah, it's like the unit dimension of the breath is something we really get to evolve out of. It's like all our bodies are breathing at the same time. Spirit, physical, emotional, spiritual, however we want to label all of these.
That's right.
I just want to get into the parallels between breath. You've mentioned that, breath and receiving, because in the act of breathing, there is inevitable receivership. You have to receive the breath inside your body. And yeah, I want to draw the parallels between breathing and receiving and breathing and also manifesting, if we want to call it that way, or even prosperity or prospering, because the subtitle of your book is Unlock the Hidden Power of Breathwork to Heal, Awaken, and Prosper. So, yeah, I want to hear the prosper part. I think most people are clear on the healing part, the awakening part. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the prosper part, which is sort of the third part of the book, is the way I see it. And I like how you picked up on that sort of parallel there and receivership. And it all starts with receivership, which is very much a feminine quality of the feminine principle. And I would say that that is where most people, male or female, doesn't matter, where most people are blocked in. We often, as I'm sure you can relate to this through your own work, that we often don't have a problem giving. Most of the time it's giving from a place of wanting to receive something into return, or there's an agenda behind it. It's not authentic giving. But when it comes to receiving even the simple compliment or some level of support or help or money or whatever it is, there's a block there. And what often I find that comes up with the people I work with is the block is the unworthiness conversation. It's the
Yeah.
insecurity. It's I'm not worthy to receive this, and therefore I'm blocking this. And so people, when they talk about their money problems or financial problems, very much is rooted in that sort of tone of receivership as well as the nervous system state. Because if your nervous system is still in a space of holding and gripping and controlling and is in a place of trauma, well, you certainly aren't in a position to not only receive, but hold the energy of abundance. And abundance and prosperity is a frequency. It's not, yes, there's symbols of it and money and love and connection and fulfillment and purpose and so forth. We can all chalk that up to be symbols of abundance and prosperity, but it's truly a frequency. It's a state of being. And so in order to, and it's a high vibrational state of being. And so we have to work through the layers of shame, of guilt, of fear, of apathy, and so forth to rise into those higher frequencies. And then not only to experience them, but to maintain them. And through the maintenance of them, through this work and through our healing work, we begin to then experience the external symbols of them in our lives. But oftentimes, the mistake that we make, and a mistake that I've made over the years, is to chase the effect, right? And the effect is these symbols I'm talking about. But really, it's coming back to the cause, and the cause is our own consciousness. And so when we work from a state of the cause, our consciousness, then the effect begins to appear in different ways. But if we keep chasing the external, and then we're just going to continuously find ourselves in these loops of what we've perceived to be as limitations.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how do you think somebody can begin to work consciously with the breath to
Mm.
expand the capacity to receive, to expand the capacity to prosper? How do you see that?
Well, I'm a man of simplicity and not complexity. And so, what I would share is even just 3 to 5 minutes of day of just waking up or driving to work or washing the dishes, just pay attention to your breath. Just
Mhm.
pay attention, kind of like we did earlier. Just take 10, 15 deep breaths. Now, if you want to go deeper, of course, there's opportunities to do that, and I'm sure share more at the end. But I have an app, Beats and Breath. We have over 100 breathwork sessions on there from 5 minutes to 45 minutes. So there's ways to tap in and do this in your daily life. But I can promise you, having worked with so many people, in fact, right now I'm working with two NFL players. And we're taking them through a 21-day protocol, and just even what have we on like day 8, day 9, they're already having profound results. And whether you're an NFL player or a leader or a stay-at-home mom or anybody, if you have a pair of lungs, which we all do, then and you can breathe, then this practice will benefit you. It's so versatile, and it will impact you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
There is, I love all that so much, man. There is something I want to share with you, a practice that I was introduced to probably in probably 2017 or 2016, man. That was at the peak of being broke. And, having a company collapsing and, I would have done anything in my power to try to save that company. Anyways, I was taking a course on prosperity, and I forget the name of the lady giving the course, and she had a practice. She was an old school OG spiritual teacher, and she had a practice. She was basically saying, grab a banknote, like maybe $100 or whatever you had, and you would every day. The part of the practice was to take that money to breathe that in, like literally you put on your nose and breathe that in and affirm, I am at one with a tremendous amount of money. And when you mentioned when I was reading your book and looking at the prosper part, it brought that practice to me immediately. So I've never, I can make some assumptions about the metaphysical nature of what was going on with the act of breathing, taking the money and literally breathing that in, and also affirming in that moment. But I wonder if you have some thoughts on it, because I was always like, man, this practice is so weird. And at the same time, if it can help me expand my capacity to receive, the hell with it, I'm gonna do it. Back then, that was my that was my train of thought.
Well, how'd that turn
Yeah.
out for you?
Well, interestingly enough, how that happened is I had to let go of what I already knew was not working. That was
Mm.
the first step. I was too scared to let go of that company. We did. In 2018, we did. And I went, and that created a lot of relief. A lot of relief in terms, instead of fighting to keep it alive, fighting to keep alive something that was meant to just fall away. Um, yeah, that happened. And then 2017, 2018 were just powerful years of recalibration. I was afraid of embracing the work I'm doing today. And I was feeling all sorts of unworthiness around it. And I had to address that and rewire that. And there was greater financial ease after that. Of course, there was a lot of debt to pay from the business venture that didn't work out well. But I didn't become a millionaire that year or the year after or the year after that. I didn't become a millionaire then. But there was just, and I don't know if I can attribute that to the course itself, but it was just a very interesting practice to
Mm.
breathe that in. And one thing that I almost forgot about to this day. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on it? Or is it too
Yeah.
far-fetched?
No, I don't think anything's too far. I mean, of course, it's our own perception of the practice itself. And I think there's many practices that might not work for one person, but works for another. Now, when
Yeah,
you're talking very literally about this practice, you're holding the physical manifestation of something, which in this case is money, right? It's a
yeah,
paper object.
yep,
So it's an object that we can see, that we can feel, that we can touch, we can smell. And therefore, this has a very powerful influence in our everyday life when we can actually experience it with the five senses. And then you literally using your breath as a way to sort of activate the flow of this energy, right? And we can get into actually the deeper levels of metaphysics in this conversation, which is all
yeah,
about flow and currency and what actually money means, which in this case, and just to simplify it, it's a symbol of energy of abundance. And it's nothing more. It's not good or it's not bad. It's neutral. And it's what we label it and our beliefs around it. And so through a practice like this, or, I'm sure there's many other practices that we can share, is that we are literally coming into right relationship with it. Now, I always am very careful when I talk about manifestation or create reality creation, because oftentimes the very shallow pursuits of just wanting to get money, it can leave us astray. And there's ways in which I've manifested sums of money, and it's been beautiful. I love money and I love the symbol of it and what it does for me and my family and my life. However, without a foundational root of purpose and a compass and serving something greater than yourself, it can very much leave you in a space of feeling unfulfilled. And so
Yeah.
when we have a backbone of, hey, this money is going to fuel my service, it's going to help me share my gifts, it's going to help me give back to others, it's going to help me, then we're tapping into something deeper and money will flow to you from there. And I'll share one other money hack while we're on it. Something that was told to me by a very influential billionaire. And he told me directly the secret to abundance and to experiencing the symbol of that in your life is to give at least 10 to 20% of your income away all the time, just giving to something that you care about, because it's through that act and not just giving to receive with an agenda, but truly giving to something that you truly care about. That's how he's made like all of his money. It just kind of comes back like tenfold. And it's like a
Yeah.
secret to prosperity. So I just thought
Yeah.
I would add that in there.
Yeah, it's like to contribute to the circulation of money, not to become a hoarder to a
Yes.
certain degree. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. The
I love
hoarding
that.
energy is what we're taught. So like, hey,
Yeah.
keep it for a rainy day, right? We've heard that before, but
Yeah.
it wants to be in circulation and flow. It's not meant to stay stagnant.
Yeah. Just like the breath. It's like
Yep. Just like
not
the
just
breath.
inhaling and holding the inhale inside without exhaling.
Yep.
There's something to the breath that I find fascinating, and usually when I guide integration journeys, guided imageries, and shadow integration processes, which I've become increasingly aware of, we have this unconscious trust with the breath. What I mean by that is we don't even pay attention to the moment between an exhale and an inhale. It's like that moment where your body is basically kind of like out of air and you just unconsciously trust that the next breath is going to be there.
Mm.
You just trust that when I inhale again, oxygen is going to be there. When I inhale again, what my cells need to stay alive, which is the highest thing that I have, basically this life. It's going to be there. And I've been when I was reading your book, and especially the last chapter, I think it's living a breath-centered life or
Uh-huh.
something like this. I'm not sure if I remember that well. And I started reflecting on what does it look like for me to live a breath-centered life. That cellular trust that my body has with the air around me, that the very moment I inhale, air is going to be there for me. It's like I want to have the same freaking relationship with everything else, with like abundance, with money, with resources, and to just that deep level of trust. It's cellular trust with the fact that the moment I inhale or the moment I need to inhale is going to be there for me so I can exhale safely.
Mm.
So I wonder what is coming up for you around that, because going through your book and getting into that, that's the reflection that came up.
Mm. I really appreciate it and love that reflection. I mean, at the end of the day, I believe what it all comes down to is what we've already sort of talked about is the letting go piece, but it is very much equated and correlated to that trust piece because in order to let go, we need to trust. And if we don't trust, then we're gripping, we're holding, we're controlling, we're forcing, we're striving, we're chasing. So the trust element of that breath, right? And what happens as this sort of, I like sort of speaking in these metaphors like this because it's very much relates to every single aspect of life. But that inhale and that exhale, and especially when that inhale and that exhale is equal, it's deep, it's rhythmic. We are becoming at one with the flow of life. And then mentioning sort of that in between state, the space between, that's the void. That's where creation starts. And that's why in a lot of the breathwork sessions I facilitate, all of them really, we go into a breath retention phase where we're void of breath, not only on the inhale, but then releasing that and exhaling that out and staying in that void state. And that's generally for most people where a lot of fear comes up.
Yeah.
because they're like, well, I'm not going to breathe again, right? Or I feel like I'm not, and my body wants to breathe, right? But the more we can relax into that state of being in this place in the void, wow, that's where so much happens. And when we can actually surrender to that space, well, that's where we begin to create and manifest from, and then circulate that breath to be at one and in flow with life.
Would you say that applies as well to our prosperity when it comes to moments where the flow is not as much as we would want when it comes to abundance and receiving and stuff like that? Would you say the moments where we are in touch with the void, learning how to be at peace with these moments without making it mean anything wrong about ourselves, that we are not worthy of abundance, worthy of receiving, worthy of this or worthy of that? Do you think the more we are able to practice this, the better we will be at receiving what our souls long for?
I agree. And I've often contemplated this sort of idea that being in those moments, well, I've been in the moments where I've had negative account balances, where I've been in debt, where I've had just, didn't know where the rent would come from. But sometimes, all the time, life provides, right? And when we surrender to that and we trust in that, the exact amount comes and we can pay our rent or buy our groceries or whatever it is. But really, if we're speaking to the conversation of getting out of surviving into thriving,
Yeah,
which oftentimes most of us are locked in survival mode, which just keeps repatterning the same exact experience of being broke and having the money and then being broke and the same thing, right? But when we talk about thriving and coming into right relationship with ourselves and prosperity, then we're in this place of, yes, we're in a place of trust. And we're in this place where we I think for me, if I were to relate it to my personal experience, I personally believe that I need this amount of money or I need this much to be good, right? But we
yeah,
need to drop that notion first and trust that whatever we have right now, especially when we're in right relationship, we're good. We're always taken care of. I have everything I need and more. And God, the provider, is always here for me. And when I can deepen into that, then that natural expression of money or whatever form of abundance it is, it just there's more that comes, there's more that flows, and and especially when I'm learning how to steward it with intention and use it
yeah.
with intention to impact and better the whole,
I
service
love
to
it.
the whole.
Yeah, yeah. So, what I would love to get into right now is, you wrote this book, Master Your Breath, Transform Your Life. What are maybe two or three key lessons that somebody, by picking up this book, is going to be able to receive that will help them really shift their lives in this moment?
Well, I'd say number one is just a deeper understanding and understanding and direct experience with their own breath, right? Which is for me is like, again, I can write, I can teach, I can share all day, but without the direct experience, then it's really nothing, and I like to teach through direct experience. So
Yeah,
it's a deeper understanding of what breath is. Number two, how to use the breath in various circumstances and ways in which we can heal, we can awaken, and we can prosper. And so, healing, understanding, the different aspects of ourselves, the shadow, the inner child, the emotions that we've suppressed, and how to actually bring those to the surface, and actually giving you a direct practice to do that. And then also working through the lens of awakening, right? Expanding our consciousness and expanding our capacity to live life at a greater level. And then and tapping into our personal power and potential. And then, of course, in the last part of prospering, of like truly understanding, the mechanics and laws of the universe and how to work within that realm through the lens of breath. And so, having these different facets in here and the way I've structured it, taking away really what all people want is to have a deeper and greater relationship to themselves and to feel their own wholeness and to experience freedom and to step into a life of prosperity. So, not saying that just by reading this book that's going to happen, but if you apply it and use the principles and the practices, then absolutely your life will shift.
I love that, man. And I also, I know the the work that goes into writing a book.
Mm.
So I honor you for going through that. And I myself have gone through the motion of writing a book that will be coming out later this year. The book is, as you know, called Scars of Gold. And one question I like to ask to everybody who joins this podcast is this one. What is a wound that you had growing up or at any point in your journey that became a scar of gold?
Mm. I love that. Yeah, and as I said before, your book is it's amazing, and I'm so grateful to have received that and read through that. And yeah, Scar of Gold. There's been so many, and let me tune into that. I would say that, and this is something that's an ongoing process for me as I continue to evolve and expand myself, but it's my relationship to shame.
Yeah,
That's been a big one. And I think that's pretty much, I can speak for most of humanity on that one. But my understanding, my evolution through the lens of shame, and the different various facets of shame, and from experiencing that shame directly from external figures and sources to then experiencing that shame internally and having this be this sort of two-way dialogue that's happening between myself and my reality. But then through this process of becoming, understanding what it is and how it shaped me into becoming a more integrated, whole, loving being and someone that can truly see and love myself deeply. Now, in disclaimer that that's still not perfect. There's still ways in which that manifests, and I don't see myself, or I still feel invalid or unworthy. That came up for me last week, even, but it certainly has become such a gold mine that has brought me to where I am today.
yeah. Would you say that for a big part of your journey, all the efforts you put to become accomplished were fueled by the desire to stay one step ahead of shame?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, if you put it like that, yeah, I would say that's quite accurate.
Yeah. And what happens when shame catches up with you? Like, in a general sense, but also for you personally, what would it look like to have shame catch up with you and to maybe deal with shame from the lens of like breath, maybe even breathing into it?
Well, how I share and how I talk about not only shame, but all of these different wounds that we feel is that the only way through it and the only way to experience it to its depth is to breathe into it and to feel it. Because,
Hmm.
the feeling part of it is really where the alchemy happens. We can cognitively understand and wrap our head around anything or attempt to, but that doesn't do it justice. We must go into the depth of feeling it in order for it to be liberated in some way. And I'll continue to stand by that because there's so much bypassing that we do, especially from the mind perspective, where that really brings us into, again, the rabbit holes of this logical left brain analytical mind that can't solve anything. It has to be solved through the body and through the wisdom of the body.
Yeah, I love that, man. And let's say somebody is out there and they are dealing with the same kind of wound of shame, and they are
Mm.
deeply terrified of it. Um, what are some words of encouragement that you could give them?
It's not as scary as you think.
Yeah. Yeah,
That goes for fear, that goes for grief, that goes for anything that we label as negative. It's not as scary as you think. And I say that with all seriousness as well. It's like we're often it's the fear of fear. It's
I
the
love it.
it's
Yeah,
the fear of actually what it is like that we might experience. But when we actually go into it, and David Dawkins, Map of Consciousness.
yeah,
Am I right on the name David Dawkins and this book Letting Go? I always get Richard or David Hawkins. I always get that mixed up. But anyways, he outlines a process in that. He's like, literally the letting go process is going into it and feeling it. And by the time like you're like again, like 90 seconds, 120 seconds, you go into that, then the energy that's wrapped around that in constriction actually begins to unwind itself. Yeah, it's not as scary as you think.
yeah, yeah. And I'd like now to get more into your universe. What if, let's say, somebody is coming into your universe right now through this podcast? They heard this conversation and they're like, I want to know more about this dude.
Mm.
He sounds interesting. He's said breath, breath, breath over the length of this workshop 100 of times, and I want to get into his universe. How can people do that? How can they get into your universe? First, there's a book,
Yep.
Master Your Breath, Transform Your Life. How else can they get into your world? It's the app
Yeah.
as well, Beats and Breath.
Yeah, the
Um,
app. And that's directly they're again two-way communication street. You either buy the book first or you download the app. They're both connected. There's practices in the book that connect to the app, or they operate individually. You don't have to have both. But the Beats and Breath app is really where we put everything to practice, and people have the direct experience of working with their breath. And there we upload new sessions and journeys every week. And I mean, it's just been it's always expanding and reaching new people. And I'm very grateful for the technology to be able to spread this medicine to the world. So Beats and Breath, there's a free 7-day challenge you can get. And then if you want to go deeper, we have a lot more journeys on there if you become a subscriber. And then if people that want to, I have my own personal brand as well, where I do courses and workshops, all weave in the breath, but also on different wisdom teachings and topics. And my personal website's christopheraugust.co and on Instagram at Christopher_August.
yeah, thank you so much, man. I wanted to conclude, but there is one thing that I remembered I wanted to touch on. If we
Let's
have
do it.
space for this, it's the relationship between breath and truth. From my awareness of you as the man you are, I know that truth plays a big role in your life, living a life aligned with truth in the best of your ability. And I know from the interactions we've had before that's such a big value for you. And I wonder if you draw some parallels between the breath and truth.
Mm,
And if yes, which ones?
yeah. Yeah, I love ending here. This feels like a great spot to sort of bring this all together. So first we need to ask ourselves, what is truth, right? Because I
Hmm.
think we have our own personal individualized truths that see through the lens of our limiting beliefs and perspectives and identities and egoic roles and so forth. And that's really not truth. It's maybe what we believe or to be true at this time, but it's not. But when we speak to truth, I automatically hear the word God. I hear the word divine. So, what is the truth of the divine? Well, if we were to simplify it, it's love. And so we can then go deeper into that conversation of what is love, right? And when we talk about love, of course, we often think from the romantic sense of love, but it's actually a deep, powerful, all-knowing, unconditional love that there's multiple layers and depths to, some of which I haven't even traveled to and experienced, and continue to be humbled by that force of love, which is equated to truth, which is equated to God. And so the breath is a direct access point to those greater, higher frequencies or vibrational states of being. And through that experience of breathing, we can begin to access what that truth is, and to actually not only like see that or understand that through the mind, but actually to feel that in real time. And the link between breath is and where I kind of hash this down to is that it brings us into a state of connection, into a state of presence. And when we're present, we're in the here and now. And in the here and now is where truth and love exist.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I felt the flow there. I felt the strong transmission there, and I think it's a beautiful place to conclude our conversation today as well. So I want to say thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for opening your heart. Thank you so much for writing the book and making that available. And to anyone who has been tuning into the conversation, I want to say one thing: the prompt of the day. If I fully submitted to my breath, what I would no longer be able to avoid is, or what I would have to feel is. I'm really curious about what's coming up for all of you guys. If you've enjoyed the conversation, you know where to find Christopher now. And leave a review, like the show, or, subscribe wherever you're tuning in from. And as always, thank you for being here, and I'll see you soon.